I'll deviate just a little bit this morning. Question came up a couple weeks ago. Is it okay to say no? And then there's a verse in the Bible that kind of indicates that we should not say no. So let's look at a couple verses in the Bible. I could have got you 6 or 7, but they pretty much all work the same way. First thing I want you to do, and the first thing I want you to understand is verses are in context in the Bible. Some verses apply only to my relationship to my family. Other verses apply to my relationship with the church. Other verses reply to my relationship to the world. And I have a right to expect more from my church family than I do from the world. And they have a right to expect more of me. Okay? So you gotta keep the verse in context. Are you dealing with the world? Are you dealing with the church? Are you dealing with your family? What's going on there? Second thing you have to do is you have to understand what's going on in that society at that time. The Roman captivity of Israel was a whole lot different. The relationship between the Romans and the Israelites was a whole lot different than our relationship with our government. So things are different. The Romans had different laws, different rules, and they related differently to the Israelites. Okay, so you've got to look at the society and see what's going on in the society. For instance, there's a verse in the New Testament that says, "Wives should be quiet in church and ask their husband questions at home." And all the men looked up and said,
I think that's a loaded question too, because if they're quiet in church and they ask you questions at home, that means that just doubles your load for the week.
You gotta know. You gotta be responsible.
Yeah, you got a responsible job. Anything goes wrong, it's your fault.
but what's going on there? You know, now it's different for Dawn sitting beside her husband to reach over and whisper something to her husband, or for me to look at my wife and say, "What did he say?" or what was the song number? You know, because we're sitting side by side. In the church in Israel, the women sat on the left side of the church and the men sat on the right side of the church, and there was a big aisle down the middle, and if Dawn wanted to say something to her husband, she had to shout it. And it would cause total chaos. So you see the cultural situation, in order to keep them from, it wasn't saying women shut up, okay? But it was saying don't cause chaos in the worship service because of the situation that they were living in. And the situation that, and in some temples, the women sat in the balconies in the back and the men sat on the floor. Well, she'd have to shout down to the floor and get her husband's attention, and it would make the whole church service chaotic, okay? If you don't know that, it sounds like Paul's being very mean and saying women just need to keep their mouth shut. And a lot of people interpret it that way, but that's not what he was saying. Because if you read the whole paragraph, he's saying there should be order and discipline in the church service. There shouldn't be a bunch of commotion, okay? So, is it okay to say no? Matthew 5:42 on your front page there. Give to the person who asked you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Okay? What's your leeway there?
God's going to get me for that one.
Huh?
God will get me for that one.
Okay, but can you say no? Let me read it to you again. Think about it. Give to the one who asked you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Is there any leeway there? Do you have to say yes?
As long as it's not a dump truck or if it's got an engine on it, I always say no.
You don't want me borrowing up.
But does that verse give you that option?
No.
It doesn't sound like it.
No.
Okay, let's read it in context.
Let your yea be yea and nay be nay. Pretty much that simple.
Yeah, once you say yes or no, do what you said, but that's a whole different lesson. Matthew 5:38 to 42. We'll read it in context. You have heard that it is said, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asked you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, in context, what is the context here? There was a law that the Roman army could force you, any soldier in the Roman army could force you to carry his pack and his equipment for 1 mile. If you're out working your garden or whatever, the soldier could come along and say, hey, come here, you're going to carry my pack for a mile. And the law said you had to do it. But the context here is you were dealing with the Roman army. What was the consequence if you said no?
Whip.
They probably kill you.
He had the right to kill you. He had the right to kill you.
Something on your shoulder. It's weird looking.
Okay,
It's a cricket.
get back in. Okay, so here's the situation. The Roman comes along and he says, hey, come
You
here.
gotta go take
You're going to carry my stuff for 1 mile. And you say no, and he kills you. Okay, what is the best option? Walk with him 1 mile or say no?
Walk with it.
In context, don't take on a sword with a hoe. I mean, you know, it's like going to a gunfight with a knife. You're going to get yourself killed. Jesus is saying, you know, if it's not going to accomplish anything, just do what he wants. And your kids need you, your wife needs you, your garden needs you. Don't be stupid and tell him no. Pick up his pack, carry it a mile. Matter of fact, carry it 2 miles. And then what happens? What if he says carry it a mile and you say, hey, not a big deal. Let me carry it another mile for you. What do you think happens between your relationship between the Roman army and yourself? What do you think happens?
You're finding a little bit of favor with that guy.
You'll find favor with that guy. Do you think he'll tell anybody?
Yeah, he'll probably tell the rest of the patrol, hey, we're going by his farm again. We can get this turkey to carry both our packs for 10 miles and probably get dinner to boot.
But if he goes back to the barracks and he says, you'll never guess what happened to me today. Do you think his buddy in the barracks, when they go past that house, are going to be favorable as well? Sure. You're going to establish a peaceful relationship with somebody who can kill you and not have to answer for it. Okay? Remember the centurion that came because his servant girl was sick and he bowed down to Jesus? And Jesus, and he said, you know, I'm in charge of men, and I'm in authority. But I realize that you have greater authority than I do. And that was really something for no Roman officer to say. I mean, Roman officers didn't talk like that. You know, they pulled out their sword and said, guess who's in charge here? Okay. This guy came and he knelt to Jesus. He bowed before Jesus and he said, you know, I tell men to go, they go. I tell them to come, they come. I understand authority. And you have more authority than I do. Will you please heal my servant girl? And what was Jesus' response to that?
He healed her.
Greater faith I have not found in all of Israel. How do you suppose that man came to the point where he would humble himself to an Israelite dressed in a robe out on the side of a mountain. How do you think that happened?
That's pretty desperate.
Hmm?
He was pretty desperate.
He was desperate. He could have demanded it, though. How do you suppose that happened? Do you suppose it happened because he read the Bible and realized that Jesus Christ was the Lord?
He'd heard other people talking about him.
Right. He experienced something in his life that caused him to realize that Jesus was special. They didn't have a Bible back then. The Bible wasn't written to about, it was letters to the church, but they didn't put them together until almost 1000 AD. He had no way of knowing that Jesus was special except by experiencing Jesus or knowing somebody who had experienced Jesus. And it humbled this man, and I think he became a Christian even before Jesus died on the cross. This man was worshiping God because he had experienced something. And so Jesus is saying, this thing that you do will not only benefit your life, but it may benefit their life as well. Okay? Question number 2. Who are you dealing with in this situation? According to the scripture.
You're dealing with, it says they're an evil person, right?
Right.
An opposition or adversary.
You're dealing with evil people. People who oppose you. Adversaries, like he said. Enemies. Okay? You're at the ATM, it's midnight, and you have to get lunch money for your kids, so you pop in your car and you get $50. You turn around, there's a 45 looking at your face. So how do you deal with evil people?
Buy his gun.
Huh?
Buy his gun. Buy his gun.
Buy his gun.
I'm at the ATM. Tell you what, friend, instead of stealing from me, I'll buy your gun. I've got 50 on me. I'll give you 250 for it. Let me draw it out, but give me your gun. Go get you something to eat.
Yep.
Buy his gun.
And most crooks are probably
And shoot the
dumb enough to
hostage.
fall for that. But,
Buzzard's gotta eat too.
do you look at the guy and say, I'm not giving you my $50, my kids need lunch money? No, you don't say no to him. You do what he says. This verse is talking about dealing with evil people or dealing with the world. If one forces you to go a mile, go 2. If somebody sues you for your tunic, give him your cloak as well. Okay? Now, let's say, for instance, my wife got really upset the other day because it was about her mother, and there was a legal thing happened, and they had to give the attorney a $1,200 retainer fee. And then the attorney wouldn't even talk to them. Wouldn't even take their calls, wouldn't return their calls. He just took $1,200 and just left them hanging. And when it happened, I said, I don't think that's a very good idea. And her brother-in-law Rick said it was a good idea, so they went ahead and did it. So I'm sitting there thinking, I told you so. I told you this was going to happen. He said, and she was, well, I think, we ought to sue him. How much do you suppose it would cost to get back $1,200?
About 10,000.
It's like driving to Bedford to get a cheap ice cream cone. It's just dumb. Let it go. Just let it go. Because you're not going to come out. You're not going to come out ahead in the end. And sometimes it's best just to say no. And then the consequences, we've talked about the consequences. What are the consequences if you don't say no? If you say no, you get shot. It can cost you more than it's worth. Yeah, but it's a principle of the thing. Yeah, well, I don't have $10,000 to throw away on principle, so just let it go. And maybe someday she will. Go to the next one.
I doubt it.
Deuteronomy 15:7-8. You shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him. Okay? Is there any wiggle room there? Does it give you any option to say no? I'll read it again. Think about it. You shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him. Is there any wiggle room?
Yeah.
Okay, what is it?
Well, it says your
No,
brother.
no, we're not on. Yeah, we're on page one. What's the wiggle room?
That's if he's not your brother, if he's not,
Or not poor.
Christian, if he's,
Okay, good point, you got that. Let's go to page 2. That's a good point.
You didn't even have to help me on that.
You know,
We're taking gestures, yes.
remember Jesus did say,
Bailing you out.
remember Jesus did say, don't throw your pearls before swine. But the situation's different if it's a brother. Now sometimes Jesus says, go out and feed the hungry on the street corner. You'll be walking along, Jesus says, take care of that guy. Because maybe his heart is open to a good witness. Or maybe he's the guy that's got a $100,000 job, but on the way home he begs on the street corner for an hour just to get an extra $500 a week or something. And some of them do pretty well. Okay? Let the Holy Spirit guide you, because sometimes a guy really is in need, and other times he's an extortionist. Okay. Going back to that first one, Romans 12:20. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, hey, I can get revenge. It's not really saying that. It's saying you can quicken his conscience, and you can cause his conscience to make him act differently. Like those Roman soldiers. You know, they got all the power and they got the sword and they're going to force you to do it and make you walk a mile down the road. But then when you walk 2, it's like, you know, maybe I'm not acting just the way I should. Because their conscience is going to fire up and they're going to say, you know, these really aren't, maybe some of these people aren't really so bad after all. And it could change their lives. Deuteronomy 15, in context. If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, ye shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him, and willingly lend him sufficient for his needs, whatever he needs. Okay. What is the context? Matt hit on it. It's within the brotherhood. He's talking about Israelite to Israelite. Not talking Israelite to Philistine. Okay? Talking Israelite. This particular passage of scripture is talking about Israelite to Israelite. And it actually is a stronger case for inside the family. Okay? Now I have 2 families. I have my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad, and I have you guys. Okay? I'm here to tell you that I'd much rather spend an hour with you guys than with that bunch. Does anybody identify with that? Come on, be honest. Stick your hands up. Yes, me. Oh man. You know, family reunion, family feud. Just, I'd find a chair in the corner and I'd try to go to sleep. So, but it's talking about inside the family. Okay, who are we dealing with? We're dealing with family, or we're dealing with, in this case, it could be the whole nation of Israel. Okay, what contingent are we dealing with within that family? What are there conditions? Are there
Yes.
requirements?
Yes.
This is within your gates.
Hmm?
It says within your gates or on your land.
Okay, but
What they,
what is the condition of the person we're dealing with?
what they need, what they need.
Yeah, it says need twice here, doesn't it? In that last sentence. Sufficient for his need, whatever he needs.
Does that mean if they need a good thrashing, it's okay?
Mean what?
That means if they need a good thrashing, you can give it to them.
I've heard the story more than once in different parts of the country, but, you know, the men of the town would get together and go cut firewood and split it because the wife and the children were cold in the house and the husband was drunk on the porch. What do you suppose happened back in the 1920s after the firewood was cut and split?
So,
I'd say the drunkard got
So-
took to
They
the,
tied him to the barn door, took off their belts, and they gave him the whipping he deserved. It wasn't a welfare check, there was a price to pay. And I've heard it in Indiana, and I know it happened in Ohio because I know the family. And the guy was a drunk and he didn't cut the wood. He had 5 acres of wood. He didn't cut the wood, he didn't pile it up by the door. His wife and kids were freezing to death in that house. So the men of the community went and took care of the wife and the children. And then they give the drunk the whipping he deserved. You know, I'm not so sure that the stocks in the middle of town where your head was in there was really all that bad an idea. Because once you did it, you didn't want to go back. A lot of people who come out of jail take one look at the world and they want to go back in with the big screen TV and the 3 hot meals and the education. They can get a college degree in there free. I'm still paying off my kids' education loan. But I'm only paying them
Go to
off.
prison, kids.
But I'm only still paying them off
We break the law.
because they're 2.5% money and I'm making more money on my investment. So you know, it's I make more money by making the payments at 2.5% because last year my investments got almost 30%. So why take that money and pay off 2% loans? I'm not starving, there's no need. But if there's need, and in the first verse it says, among you, what? Among you, poor. The person's poor. He's not poor by chance, he's poor by consequence. His house burned down, his cow died, he got sick at work, or he hurt his back at work, and he hasn't, Social Security hadn't kicked in yet. We are responsible. Now, what's the exception to this?
If we're doing worse than them?
Hmm?
If we're doing worse than them?
If we're worse than it, yeah, that would make us poor. But there is an exception that we are always responsible to, always. And that is a widow or an orphan in need. That is always the case. Now, that doesn't mean widows and orphans. It means widows and orphans in need. Okay? We look at the world today and we've got a lot of single parents with children. Some of them are in need. And we need to show the love of God to help them. But do you realize that the average family on welfare is making almost $60,000 a year? They can get a $600 apartment in French Lick for $75 and the government will pay the balance. I don't begrudge them that. That's fine. They get food stamps. And I've seen their carts at the grocery store. They eat better than I do. They get Medicaid for all their children. This stuff about the poor people that don't have medical care, they have medical care. They have, those Medicaid cards are everywhere. Is there a need there? is that a widow or an orphan in need? If they're making, and they get utility subsidies. Is there a need there? No, they're making $60,000 a year. I'm not obligated to go over there and give her money just because she wants money, okay? But if the benefits haven't kicked in, if the Social Security hasn't kicked in, if they're on their last dime, and it is a widow and an orphan, then I have a responsibility to do that until the need is met. And once the welfare or whatever kicks in, then the need is met and I am no longer responsible. It really bugs me sometimes when a 300-pound woman walks up to me and said, you need to buy me some groceries because my kids are hungry. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
It's time to go.